Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, councillors, officers and members of the public. I'll just run through some housekeeping rules. Please turn off your mobile phones, either set to silent or switched off for the duration of the meeting. I'd also like to inform everyone that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so welcome to any members of the public joining us online. We have a number of officers joining us here today. David Watts, who's responsible for one of the areas which we're discussing later, and one of his colleagues, Matthew Jenkins, who's the Assistant Director. So thank you for coming. I'm also very pleased to welcome to this meeting the new partner at Grant Thornton, Mark Stocks, who's joining us. I think Paul is also with us online as well. So Paul, who we know very well. So Mark is the replacement for Kieran McLaughlin, and when we go through the minutes of the last meeting, I'll be asking Mark to introduce himself and also give us some further information on some matters there. Okay, so moving swiftly on now to apologies. I just asked Callum if he could let us know of any apologies for this meeting.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Kirk Harrison and Adele Wiley.
Thank you. Agenda item 3 is declaration of interest. I just ask members if they have any declarations of interest they'd like to make on any agenda items in this meeting. Okay, thank you. We're moving swiftly on now to agenda item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on 25th of September 2023. Before I ask members if they're happy to me to sign the minutes of the last meeting as a true record, there's a couple of points which I'd like some of the officers to update us on, because things which we anticipated that may have happened since that meeting, we'll find out haven't happened. So I'll ask for some updates from Claire initially. If you could tell us what the status is, please, of the Corby accounts, because then we haven't received anything further since the last meeting, which we had anticipated. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, the Corby Borough Council accounts for 2021 are still unsigned. The latest update I had is that they are still going through their professional practice team for review in relation to the prior period accounting adjustments. I've had no further information through to say that they want to adjust anything. So as far as I'm aware, that the accounts are still proceeding to be signed. For whatever reason, it just seems to be taking a long time to go through their professional practice team. So we've answered all the queries, sent everything back, and I'm still waiting, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you for that update. I don't know if any members have got any comments. Councillor Roberts, thank you.
Just a quick, simple question. Is it a resource issue?
They haven't said as much, but it probably is. I can't get anything out of Ernest & Young as to why it's taking so long, unfortunately.
Is there anything we can do about that?
From my perspective, I've provided a revised information if they've requested it as soon as they've asked for it. So I've responded as quickly as we possibly can to every query.
As a member of the
raised.
committee and not an auditor and not an accountant, I'm getting quite embarrassed about the fact that I'm accepting this situation. I'm not. How serious, Chair, is this?
Yeah, I share your disappointment, and I'll not at this point. I'll probably ask Mark to come in a bit later and explain where this leaves us in clearance of old accounts. I am very disappointed, especially given what the EY partners said at the last meeting. I felt that it was imminent, and I'm even more disappointed that they haven't, number one, turned up at the meeting to explain this. Or I understand it's not always possible to come to the meeting, but they can join us on the media, and that's just as effective. So I'm quite disappointed in that. I feel that the officers are doing everything that they can, and I don't think there's anything that we can do than keep the pressure on. I'll ask maybe Janice to make a comment and see what she feels that we could do. I know Claire's been working very hard on it, and she's already updated. So, okay, if you go, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll also update from the county position as well, which unfortunately is very similar. So we were expecting the County Council's accounts to be signed off exactly the same timeline as Corby, and they are still outstanding. I know that the team over there have been working very hard, and I know we've been told that that's also imminent as well from EY.
Okay, Michael, comments?
Yeah, hi. I mean, this is no reflection, obviously, on yourselves, but just to reiterate, it is disappointing, but there never seems to be any repercussions or ramifications of this, and this is what bothers me. The people who've got an audit experience here, if this was happening in the real world, there would be serious ramifications. Well, yeah, yeah, absolutely. In the business world, if this was the case, then the ramifications would be very serious. But it just happens and happens, and I don't. What can we do to actually? Is there anything that we can do?
I'm not aware of anything that we can do. I think we're constrained to an extent by the arrangement through the PSAA, and you may want to comment on that, Claire, or if there's anything that you could add on that. I'm not aware, or Janice, you may wish to add something.
No, we're very limited in the actions we can take. I think if you look nationwide, there's a number of accounts that are outstanding across the country that have been either through resource issues, whether it's the auditors or the councils, that are outstanding. And we are talking hundreds of accounts that are outstanding over a number of years across the country, hence the action that we spoke about at the last committee that the Secretary or the Minister was looking to take at that point about putting an end date as to when accounts could be signed off, and if that end date wasn't met, then they would be disclaimed. So there's quite a few that are outstanding across the country, and there isn't much we can physically or reasonably do other than ask for the accounts to be done and come back. But if they're not satisfied enough to sign them, we're very limited, or they've not done their necessary checks to sign them. I think we're very limited in what we can do, unless Mark tells us there's a secret we can undertake with external auditors. Then we are a little bit at a loss to promote this any further.
Yeah, I think in these situations we always look for what levers we can pull, and I don't think those levers are there for us to pull. So it's not within our gift, and I'll keep on referring to Mark, and I think he's going to give us some wider aspects, and that'll be really useful. And I know Councillor Levels got a comment or query as well.
Yeah, so we just clarify this point about resources. If they're doing the audit, that's fine. That might be a resource issue. But if I understand this correctly, they're waiting for their own internal processes to approve the accounts. That should not be a resource issue. This would be probably a department which should be ready resourced to meet any audit, which would meet any audit inquiries. And I don't accept that it's not resourced properly. It's just something this council obviously hasn't been given enough priority by Ernst & Young to get these things done, which is shameful, given that they're resigning anyway. You might be able to, you might understand it. They might think, well, so what? This is not a continuing engagement, but that's not the point. You'd think they want to get shot of us.
I think everybody's made their views quite clear, and I want that reflected in the minutes about how disappointed the officers are, number one, and I think the committee are number two. And then that leads us on to two really significant points which have an impact as a result of this, because the county in particular is still not finalised. One of the key aspects from that is it gives us our opening position, and then we have to disaggregate the situation from the county, so we know it's split between west and north, and so we can't do that until the audit is completed, and so that gives us a significant problem going forward. Janice has also explained what the wider position is in the country, and all these whole these large numbers of councils which are significantly behind. I mean, ours to some extent has a story to it with creating the north and the west, but there's central government involvement in that, and now is the point I'll perhaps hand over to Mark Stocks from Grant Thornton, and I'll ask him first of all to introduce himself and explain the position he has in the firm, which I'm very pleased with because of his profile within the firm. And then we can start to get some understanding of where this leaves us, number one, in disaggregation, and number two, I think the terminology that's being used is backstop, and if you could explain what the situation with that is, Mark, that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Mark Stocks. I'm a partner with Grant Thornton. I'm actually the national partner, so I'm responsible for all of our work across the country, whether that's health or local government. So I do get to have quite a vivid oversight of what's happening with local audit, and I understand and sympathise with some of the frustrations that some of the councils have expressed today. So there is a problem with local audit. I think there's a clarity now that there's not really enough local auditors in the country. And that's not just EY. I think that's all local auditors have struggled to recruit and retain so sufficient resources to do the level of work that's now required of us by the Financial Reporting Council. Because as you'll be aware, those of you who have an audit background, just the level of work that auditors have to do now has significantly increased, and that's all levels of audit. So whether you're in commercial audit or in the public sector, the last sort of 5 years have seen I suppose an exponential growth in just terms of the level of work, and that I think the commercial world have responded better to that. They've managed to kind of overcome that. I don't think local audit has, and that's for a number of reasons. One, it's a very specialist service, so it's been difficult for people to recruit. So I can't go and pick up another auditor from somewhere. I literally have to grow my own from associates all the way through, and we do that. So, but not everybody wants to stay because it has been a difficult period. And then, in some cases, local government hasn't performed particularly well. So you've all seen the kind of some of the financial reporting issues, of some of the councils. So I'm not going to kind of name them, but that, there's some councils that take between 3 to 4 times the level of resource that they ought to. So just because, they've got financial sustainability issues, or they've got sort of issues with financial reporting. And I actually think all councils have sort of struggled with the uplift in standards, particularly around property valuation, where it's not been a particular focus of local government for the longest time, but the standards that you're now being held to are the standards of a FTSE 300 company. So that's taken a while to go through. So what we have, as Janice said, is we have an enormous backlog of audits now. I think it's something over 600 across the country. Now, the PSA have been out to tender. The new contracts start from 23-24. We've actually downsized the level of work as Grant Thornton that we're doing, but to actually meet the challenge, we're actually maintaining the same level of team. So we actually have the same number of people doing less work, which I'm hoping gets us back on top of our own kind of backlog. Now the government, to try and resolve these issues, is considering bringing in something called a backstop. So in the backstop date at the moment is proposed at the end of March 24. Now, that may change because it's not been consulted on, it's not been put into legislation, so that may move. But I think they will put in a backstop date, whether it's March or not, I'm uncertain. And at that point, then all accounts up to and including accounts for 22-23 will have to be disclaimed. So for those of you who aren't auditors, a disclaimed opinion is where the auditor basically goes, I just don't know. I just don't know what your books and records are actually showing. Now, under normal circumstances, that's a really poor opinion to get. But what the government is going to do is going to legislate and change the code of practice for ourselves as auditors, just to enable all the backlog to be wiped out. And so we all effectively start again on the 23-24 accounts. Now it has some problems. It certainly has some advantages. Because, at the moment we're doing your 21-22 accounts, but in reality, you want me to be telling you sort of how you're performing for 23-24 and what your balances are for 23-24. So it does allow me to kind of catch up and you get current information from your auditor rather than old information. A disclaimed opinion isn't a panacea, though. So, in moving on to the next year's audit, so say we end up disclaiming 22-23, then to get you a reasonable opinion on the 23-24 accounts, we will have to look at your opening balances as well as looking at your closing balances on those accounts. So there's still a significant level of work to do. So, so there's quite a lot going on. There's also conversations around changing the accounting code for local government, which I think will help. It makes sense to kind of like declutter some of the accounts and change some of the accounting. So there's quite a lot going on to try and help us all to catch up. Now, you mentioned disaggregation, Chair, and so disaggregation of the old county's balance sheet is pretty critical to you as a council. Now that process really goes on outside the accounts, so there's no reason that that you shouldn't be getting on with that, and that's one of the conversations that I've had with your director of finance and with your chief executive. It is important that you finalise that disaggregation of the balance sheet, because it will allow both yourself as a council and ourselves as auditors to determine your financial sustainability and your underlying financial strength. I'm going to pause there, Chair. I've realised I've given you quite a lot of information in a very short period. I'm happy to give you more detail or answer questions as you wish.
Thank you for that very comprehensive response there. I'll look to the members to see if they've got any questions before I go to Janice and ask her to comment and give us an update on the position with disaggregation. Is there any points? Councillor Eakins, thank you.
Yeah, I think some of those comments are quite alarming, just as an understatement. I can understand where you're coming from, and that fact is that resources are the be-all and end-all blame for everything at the moment. And that's of the existing old Ds and Bs from previous, before the unitary started, and also with the old NCC. I can understand that there's not enough auditors to go around, but at the same time, is that when these contracts were bid for, everybody was confident that they could do them, else they wouldn't bid for them. So we've got an issue there. If someone has agreed to take on contracts and then now find out that they haven't got the resources to do it, or they hadn't had the resources to do it, is there, you're saying there's nothing we can do about it, but surely there must be some financial repercussions coming from there, whether we pay them or not pay them. If they can't do the job and haven't done the job, then they should be paying it back, is the easiest thing for me to say at it. I was also worried about the disassociation of a whole year's worth of accounts in 22-23. Well, they're probably one of the most important ones to us as a new unitary council. 21-22, 22-23. We're now moving into 23-24, and we'll be soon moving into the last quarter of the first 4 years of this unitary. By what I can understand, and I'll probably be wrong in saying this, but it does seem to me is that every time there seems to be a problem in being able to complete a set of accounts and get them signed off, the go-to thing could be now is, well, we haven't got the people to do it, we haven't got the time to do it, we've not got the resources to do it, so therefore we'll just disassociate that year and start again the following year. I don't agree personally that you're saying that the important thing is 23-24. It's not. 23-24 is ongoing, but the important thing is where we were before we got to that number.
Yeah, I think we've got to think about who we direct those points to, and they're EY points, in my opinion. So, I mean, Mark's given us a very good explanation, but it's not on his watch. No. So it's been held back, and I don't know if I'm sure you can understand our position, Mark. I don't know if you want to make a comment now. So you got your hand up. Thank you.
No, I can understand the frustration, and I think it would be a mistake just to focus on local audit resources. So I think there's a reality that that local government just in general needs to improve the quality of its financial reporting. So, and then those bodies that have failed in terms of financial governance, then absolutely something needs to be done about those from the government, and we're regularly in contact with the department over some of those financial failures. So no, that doesn't move away from your frustration with your current auditors, but you know, from my perspective as your auditor for 21-22 onwards, then I don't have a set of accounts for 21-22. I don't have a set of accounts for 22-23, and you can't produce those accounts partially because you've not disaggregated your balance sheet. So I think it's important that you focus on what you can do as a council. You do need to produce those accounts, and you do need to disaggregate your balance sheet.
Thank you, Mark. I think it'd be a good point now to get Janice's view on this, and if you could address the disaggregation point and where we are with that, and what the potential routes that could take and times, and then we can assess how that can affect these clearances of these prior year accounts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the disaggregation of the balance sheet doesn't impact on what we're getting for 2021 from both the county and Corby. That is prior to any disaggregation issues. And we have been working on the disaggregation of the balance sheet. We are waiting for, as you say, the final sign-off of it, but a lot of work has been undertaken by officers, notably Dean and Claire on the table here, to work with our colleagues in West Northamptonshire to look at the disaggregation of the balance sheet. But as I've previously reported to this audit committee, there are a couple of items where perhaps we don't agree on the basis of the disaggregation. Unfortunately, one of those items is quite significant, and therefore we will be looking at going down more formal routes to determine the split between West and Northamptonshire as part of that, and both councils have agreed that that's the process they need to take to go and to work out the split between the two councils. But as I say, the vast majority of the balances, we are there or thereabouts getting them agreed. It is one in particular, but it is a significant one, as in it's our capital financing requirement. And because that is several millions, then we do need to, or even hundreds of millions, we do need to make sure that it's done appropriately in order that both authorities wish to see that they get the appropriate split of that for their authorities going forward. And it is important because it relates to effectively the sort of the net worth of the authority in terms of what we've got in terms of debt versus what we hold as assets. So it all affects quite a lot of important ratios as well that the government are now looking at themselves in terms of their best value regime that they're introducing, to look at some of the indicators that they're consulting on to look at as well. So not only from our perspective in terms of authority we need to do that, but we know it is one of those ones that are important from that perspective as well. So we have had the meeting with colleagues in West Northamptonshire, and a decision has been taken that we are not going to reach an agreement in that area. We have a differing view. So that is one that we will be taking to, as I say, formal work to do that, and the two monitoring officers are working through what that will mean. And we've obviously kept our external auditor up to date on the position of that.
Okay, perhaps it might help if you could give us a sense of, number one, the scale of this, and then you talked about the resolution process, which I understand is arbitration, how that works and what it might mean. I know you can't say how long it's going to take, but what type of time frame could we be looking at for a normal arbitration? And maybe even Mark may help us here on his experience on the national basis of what that could mean.
I was just checking with Claire to make sure I'd got the correct figure for the CFR. So the figure that we're talking about needs to go to arbitration is £953 million. So that is the reason that we cannot take a reasonable, we need to get it done right, and we need to make sure that our views are heard and that we go through this formally. It isn't something we can just say, oh, that's all right then. And that's probably coming from both councils, to be fair on that. So that's why it's such a significant number. Now, within that number, there are two areas that we're looking at around what's post-2008 and pre-2008 in terms of borrowing, etc. So there's different ways you can split it down, but ultimately that is the total number that we are seeking more formal proceedings on at the moment. We haven't entered into those proceedings. As I say, the monitoring officers are looking at that, but essentially it goes through a formal arbitration where it needs to be heard by a lawyer, I think, some legal person. I can't remember what the fact is. No, it wasn't actually clarified. Normally, if you go through, there are things that are read through, like by the they need to be heard by somebody with a legal background, shall we say, as part of this. But within this one, I'm just not sure whether or not it gets appointed through the Secretary of State, etc. And that's the bit we are trying to find out through our monitoring officers, what will be the formal route that we need to go down in order to secure this. It's not one we've been down before, so that's why we do need the proper guidance for this.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, we can clearly see how material that is that with that number, 938 million, as to whether it lands on our balance sheet or theirs. That's what we could be looking at. So I see Councillor Roberts had his hand up, but I'll just ask Mark to maybe give us some comments from your wider perspective on a national basis of when these things go to arbitration. What would it normally take? I know that's just a mere indication, but I think it helps us set in our mind what we could be in for.
Thank you, Chair. It's very hard to answer your question because you're in a unique position, not in terms of coming into into a new unitary body, but most, because you've been divided effectively in two, or the county was divided effectively in two, then there's nobody I've been able to identify nationally who's your mirror. So you're new to me as well in terms of, or the situation's new to me in terms of you having to go to arbitration. I suppose I would couch it in different terms. I don't, some of the timescales put to me have been like a year or 2 years, and that's just not tenable. You're the ones who will be kind of setting the parameters for the arbiter, and that needs to be between no longer than 4 to 6 months, I would suggest, because we have to get to a position where we understand your underlying finances, and at the moment we don't.
Yeah, thank you. I think from a committee's perspective, we can see that time is of the essence on this. So you can get a good arbitration position, which might take a year, but I think the timeliness of this is clearly important when that point arises, and I'm sure our finance and our monitoring officer will take that on board. I think Councillor Roberts had a question or comment. Thank you.
Well, never be interesting, never be unique. That's what my late father told me, especially in business. And we've heard the shocking information. I mean, that we're talking £1 billion here. And it's going to take a long time to sort that out. No matter what we think, it's going to take years rather than months to sort that out. And that's going to impact massively on what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a unitary authority. We are unique, as Mark quite rightly says. He can't find a mirror authority to bounce off. And it's going to affect our ability to do things. I won't list them. You're probably cleverer than I am at this, but this is really not a good position to be in, and somebody needs to be told what's going on. This isn't good. And I'm not an auditor or an accountant. I'm sure people in the room who've got the training must start to think this is really not good.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there is this sense of urgency, I believe, because we've got to know our position, but then we've got to protect our position as well. If we believe that we're in the right on this, I think we've got to do the right thing for our council tax.
If you felt I was suggesting that we do a shortcut, then that's far from.
No, I know you wasn't saying that. I think it's
fight and fight again for every penny. It's our money. It's our community's money.
Exactly. Okay. I don't know if anybody else has got any questions or comments. I need to go back to the original agenda item, which is the minutes. So just deal with that another day. So I'll ask members if they're happy for me to sign the minutes of the last meeting as a true record. If I could seek a proposer.
You wanted, sorry, thank you. Where is it? So I've got to find it, but it's circled. Is it there? Yes, where it says, in addressing the sense of urgency in relation to the audit programme for the Children's Trust, agreed that members Harrison, Jelly and Anslow would liaise with appropriate officers. I don't think I have been liaised with, and I'm just wondering whether that has happened.
Okay.
It's on page 9.
Okay, apologies for that. So I'm just checking it's not anywhere else in. Yes, I should have updated on that. So
yeah.
What happened? I made contact with Hilary Daniels, who's the chair of the Finance Risk and Audit Committee for the Children's Trust, and I was very encouraged by that discussion, in that we held similar views and concerns about sources of assurance, and we're wanting to get those sources of assurance clearly documented so we can assess whether they're adequate. They're wider than audit. So the regulatory involvement as well. So what we're in the process of doing now is arranging a meeting for next month. So people will be contacted about that. So that's being dealt with at the moment. And the chair, Hilary Daniels, has agreed to come to this audit committee and present her views on where she feels the sources of assurance are. And she's got an open invite to come to this committee from me to whenever she wishes. And she's also invited me to go to their committee whenever I wish. And Rachel attends now on a regular basis. So there's a much stronger relationship there. So the points that we did have about worries about sources of assurance, we're hopefully getting some progress on. I think there's some issues about the overall opinions for prior years, and we exercised those last time, and I think they're in the process of looking for sourcing who's going to do the audit programs, because again they're behind for 23, 24. So they're going to have to catch up. They've engaged an external firm, I think it's BDO. Yeah, it's BDO, to execute that because WNC have moved away from that. They had similar concerns to us, and obviously the head of internal audit left. Does that answer your question? Yes, sorry. Yeah, I should
Next
have brought,
month.
I should have brought
it
that
will
out.
be coming back.
I should have brought that. Yes, it will be
Thank
coming
you.
back. Yeah.
That's really what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts, did you have a point?
Just while we've got Mark in the room, as it were, we've got this situation with the Children's Trust where it's a budget that we can't control. I'm putting that right. I'm not trying to twist it in any way. And that's got to be of some concern within an organisation, a business. And along with the other things that we've discussed today, are we getting critical, Mark, or are we still okay?
In terms of your overall finances, Councillor?
Well, yes.
Well, we're just about to start our value for money work, and we'll look in detail at financial sustainability. So I don't think there's any imminent danger of you having to issue a Section 114 notice. But clearly, you know, every time you overspend, every time you draw money from reserves, that weakens your financial position. So we'll be looking at that in some detail, and particularly how you go about setting the 24-25 budget, because that needs to be on as a recurrent basis as possible. There's a reality that all children's services are struggling nationally, so particularly around the cost of children's placements. They're going up significantly, but you know, you have to engage with the Children's Trust. There's no you and them. You are together in this. So how you take that relationship forward will impact on your financial sustainability.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Ansley?
Yeah, I thought there was a new way of working, a closer relationship. And I'm just looking over there at David because it's something that was discussed at another meeting, wasn't it?
Okay. David,
Thank
you,
you,
like
Chair. Yeah, and it's a really good challenge, Councillor Roberts. I think the assurances that I would want to give is that we've been doing a fairly significant amount of work at a corporate leadership level around trying to improve that working relationship with the Children's Trust. We have agreed jointly, albeit we're in the early stages of developing how that will look, to develop a transformation and efficiency board, which gives us a greater say over investments that we put in that are expected to deliver both improvements in outcomes but also an improvement in the trust finances moving forward. That being said, Mark has rightly pointed out that there are lots of children's services that are struggling across the country, and I think it's really important that we try not to get into that blame game around you know, whether it's a children's trust or not. Even if those children's services were still within the council, we would probably still be struggling in a similar sort of way, not least because there's such a monopoly over the placement costs, with most local authorities having outsourced all of that activity, and there being very few providers that we can tap into. But certainly the Transformation and Efficiency Board we think will be positive. There will be representatives from our corporate leadership team on that board, including myself, Janice, and the Chief Exec as well, who will consider some of those proposals. And certainly when you look at some of the performance that the Trust has got, I think we recognise that they tend to be sorting things out at the latter end of a process and trying to shift that balance to investing in the right sorts of early help is really where we want to try and focus and get them into. So thank you, Councillor Anslow, for bringing attention. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not suggesting that anybody's doing anything wrong. I'm aware, because we discussed it here in this very room, the work that you're doing and the challenges that the positive challenges within the organisation. and the relationships that we're now building means that we can get better outcomes. All I'm saying is that the global budget has to be in a good position to help and support you, or else you can say, look, I've done all of this hard work and I now need you to perform and to deliver.
Thank you. I think one of the areas that I've took some considerable assurance from is the work that Grant Thornton did on their value for money, which covered the governance, financial sustainability, VFM. We had a good result out of that. What's a shame, in my opinion, is there's not that same audit regime over the Children's Trust, because we would have had something which that would have been one of the sources of assurance that I felt we could have relied upon. And, you know, so I understand what's being done on all sides, but it's just one of those things which underpins your level of assurance, and I think it would be helpful if they had a similar regime, because it's, you know, it's the same bailiwick really. It's really irrelevant whether it's within a separate trust. It's our responsibility. It's just that we've been given that situation. Okay, so I did prematurely go to the approval of the minutes, so I'll go back to that again now. Thank you, Councillor Anzo, for picking that up for me. So I'll ask members if they're happy to sign the minute, for me to sign the minutes of the last meeting as a true record. If I could seek a proposer for that, please. Councillor Jelly, and the seconder, Councillor Anzo. Thank you. All those in favour, please show. Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, I'll move on now to the Audit and Governance Committee annual report, and there's a covering note from Rachel on this. I have my view on the report, which is a very good review, but you may think that this was mainly written by me. I took a lot of work was done. Most of the work was done. Nearly all the work was done by Rachel on this. So, and I think it's been brought together very nicely. But I'll hand over to Rachel to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the committee will recall that the first annual report was produced by the committee last November, came to last November's meeting. So we now want to make this an annual process. So the last one obviously covered 18 months. We now want to make this a regular November report for you. So it's covering the period from the 1st of October to the 31st of September. So the report is in line with the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, which recommends that the Audit Committee should be fulfilling its role, making sure it's accountable for fulfilling its responsibilities and is accountable to Council for delivering the governance and assurance that it needs to. So the report essentially covers your core functions as a committee and reflects on what you've done in relation to each of those over the year. Also looks at some of the training that's been provided and how that's targeted some of those key areas and how that links to your terms of reference. We've also included in there some reflection on obviously the number of external audit reports that has just been discussed earlier today in relation to the amount of reports you've seen in relation to the Corby Borough Council accounts. And reflect on those and some of the feedback from external audit as well. It also reflects on the work that you've completed in terms of reviewing audit reports. So you've received a lot of reports over that year. You have invited management along where the opinion has been less than moderate assurance as well, and I think that's proven to be a useful process. So that's all reflected. Also, obviously, we did over the last few months complete the effectiveness review against the latest SITFA guidance, which some members of the committee supported me with. Pulling that together. So we've fed back on that as well, and that was one of the main reasons we wanted to pull that together so that we could reflect on it in this report. So that's on page 29 of the papers. So we've got a bit of a feedback on there and the action plan that came out of that as well. So essentially it's for the committee to make sure that you're happy. This fully reflects all of the good work that the committee's completed over the last 12 months. With a view to then taking this to Council to show what the committee's been up to and how you've fulfilled your responsibilities. So happy to expand on anything further, and obviously it's your report to amend as you see fit.
Okay. Michael,
Hi.
thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to be included in the team if possible. Unless it's a very unsubtle message. I'm not actually on any of the membership things or the...
Sorry, through you, Chair. I think we mentioned on page 23.
Is it?
And page, sorry.
No. I just wondered if that was just sort of council members, but I'd like it to be known that I did attend 5 of the meetings.
Yeah. Sorry, just to add, Joe, on page 23, we talked about the constitutional requirements to have independent persons on the committee. And so we've said there is currently one independent person on the committee who has attended all 6 of the meetings held during this period. So we've covered it off in that section, but no photo. But we could add a photo if you so wish.
No, you're all right.
I'm sure a photo will be fine.
Yeah, I'm sure it will.
Okay, just see if there's any... Councillor Ansley, thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying I found that a really interesting report to read. It made me feel quite proud to be part of the committee, because I've learned a lot and continue to learn this afternoon. Thank you. And it's just a shame, I suppose it's going back to what we talked about earlier with Table 4, the financial reporting, how frustrating that is, you know, because it's been a year where that Corby Borough Council accounts have been coming up, and how frustrating we find that. But we have talked about that. I just wanted to say it again, really. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the things that's quite interesting in this is how our focus has been really on audit, and maybe slightly to the detriment of the governance aspects. And I think we should pick that up later. And you know, this links back to some of the things which were raised in our training prior to this. I think other points that are really useful is it highlights management attendance. You know, we've got one. You know, when we have these week reports, they always come and they answer the questions, and that's really highly valued. And what it does is I think I'd refer to it as control environment things, and to me that means tone at the top. That means they think it's important to come here and give their view of things, and that really helps. I think the final bit, which was really useful, was the effectiveness review. That did identify some deficiencies, and you know, and they're in the plan to address. So I think we should replicate that next year. So I'm quite pleased with the overall view of. So thanks to all those people involved in that review. And Councillor Lee, thank you.
Yes, an excellent report, very informative. It says on page 14 that we have in point 4.4 that we have 12 elected members. I think there are just 10 elected members and 1 independent member. So I wonder whether we are a little bit depleted. I think the number of members has gone down since May, which is a shame. But I believe we need to look at our terms of reference, and it's a shame that we won't be doing that at this meeting, although that was on the agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, I share your confusion with the maths that reduced the number of members on this committee. I found it a bit bizarre. And I know we had a discussion about it, and I was a bit disappointed that it did go down. I think the other point there is what we've got to do is we've got to get more independence on here. You know, we value what Michael does, and I think if we get other people, it would be equally, it would add to it as well. And we've tried, and I think we've got to retry again and keep on going until we get a full complement. Especially more importantly now, we're down on councillor members than what we were before. Okay, if that's all the... Councillor Jelly, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just one comment to agree with yourself. When we did the self-assessment, I thought that was really useful. There was a huge amount of good stuff, excuse me, that came out of that, and I think we should continue to do that on an annual basis. I think it's a really good idea. So.
Yeah, I think we should definitely, we'll definitely schedule that. That's scheduled in for every year going forward, as far as I'm aware. And if it isn't, we'll make sure it is. Okay, just looking to see if there's any more questions or comments, and if not, I'd like to move that the report be approved to be presented to full council. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, I'd like to invite Rachel to present the note to the committee on the internal audit plan development for 20... No, I've got the wrong one, sorry. I've missed out 5. It's Audit and Governance Committee Annual Report 2023. I'd like to invite Rachel to present the briefing note to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is just a brief update on the internal audit plan development for 2024-25. So as per last year, I just wanted to consult the committee just to share with you how I plan to develop next year's internal audit plan coverage, just before we make a start on that process. So we are already starting to think about the 24-25 plan, and I just want to set out the process and start the kick-off really with the consultation with yourselves. So essentially the report just sets out the key stages of the report, set out the process that I'll be following. So on section 4, page 32. So essentially we'll be looking at risk registers to see which risks we have that are factoring high for the council at the moment across the various directorates. And that's both at a strategic risk register level, which is obviously on the agenda today, but also at directorate level in terms of those risk registers as well, in addition to the fraud risk registers, which we also talked about today in the training. So we're also looking at those alongside the corporate plan because we want to understand where as an organisation we want to be and what risks could stop us from getting there. So that's the starting point really for the plan. We'll also look at the coverage that we've had over the last couple of years, any areas it would be useful for us to revisit. So usually if we've given an opinion of less than moderate or satisfactory assurance, we'd want to revisit the following year to see the improvements that's been made. Also, if there were some areas where we were not able to conduct the full level of coverage that we wanted to, again, we usually look to follow that up the following year. We will be consulting with senior management, so I'll be meeting with all of the members of the corporate leadership network to talk about the risks within their service area and where internal audit could add value to them in either an assurance way or in consultancy support over those 12 months. And then obviously consulting with yourself. So this is the start of that process. So I'm not expecting members of the committee to reel off a number of audits here and now. But what I would ask is that there are any areas that you consider that you would think would be useful to feed into that audit planning process. And it's not that it would necessarily just go straight onto the plan. It will need to go into that process, be risk assessed, look at other sources of assurance, make sure we're directing our resources in the right way. But we can feed it into that process if we receive any feedback. So what I would recommend is, and it's part of the recommendations today, is that the committee note the approach but also highlight any risk areas. And that can be via email to myself or the chair between now and ideally the end of January would be useful. And we can obviously then feed that into that process. And yeah, so that's the rest of the report kind of sets out the surrounding around that process. So as we've mentioned as well within the report, obviously we're looking here at the internal audit plan for Northamptonshire Council. As with it, and we talked about under the internal audit charter, we do obviously look at assurances from other respects, so other assurances we get from the internal auditors, for example, for the trust, and that performs that bigger picture. So we want to make sure that the piece of the jigsaw that is our internal audit plan is fit for purpose and covers those key areas and complements that wider assurance framework as well. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Obviously, the draft report, the plan, when it's developed, will come to this committee for review and approval, which is due to come in April next year, which will then enable us to make a start delivering those audits from April onwards. The only other thing I was going to mention, obviously last year we did have a separate workshop session with members of the committee, which I found really useful because it was an opportunity to go through the areas I was expecting to come onto the audit plan, understand why they were there, just so we could have that discussion ahead of the committee meeting when we brought the draft plan. So if members would be minded to do so, I'm happy to have one of those sessions again, probably in February next year, which is around the same timing as last year, and that would form part of the process as well. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I personally found that really helpful last year. You know, for those members that attended, I think it provided some input and some influence on the shape of the audit programme, and I'd advocate that we replicate that process this year, and if we can get as many committee members there as possible, I think that would be good. I'll take the views of the rest of the committee on that, together with any other comments or questions on the report. Thank you. Councillor Lee, thank you.
Thank you. I will confirm in an email that I would like the auditor to look at the integrated care board and public health, the area of public health. Public health is one of the areas where there's an action point outstanding for more than 3 months, and it feels like a blind corner to me. We don't really have much representation on the integrated care board. The date of the next meeting is not even on their website. There isn't much information that we get as members I feel, about public health, whereas it's so crucial for our residents.
I think comments like that are very useful to build into that day or that afternoon when we go through that, and that will enable us to balance our whole resources and target them in areas which we feel warrant it. I'll just look and see if there's any further questions or comments. If not, the recommendation is that we note the proposed approach to development of the internal audit plan for 24-25 and highlight any risk areas for consideration in the planning process where the committee seeks assurance in the year ahead. And we're deferring that process to that meeting as a result of those discussions. So we've discussed the report, so I'll move that report be approved to be presented to full council members' content. Thank you. If I can move on to agenda item 6. Again, this is the internal audit plan development. Oh, sorry. Agenda item 7. Sorry. 6.
Strategic risk register.
I've got it wrong here. Sorry. Yeah. Agenda item 6 is the strategic risk register update. I'll hand over to Rachel to present this report. So.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the regular update of the Council Strategic Risk Register. So as usual, we've provided a full copy of the risk register as it currently stands as Appendix 1, alongside the risk map in Appendix 2, which shows where the risks feature in relation to the risk tolerance levels, and some background on the risk scoring in Appendix 3. So in the covering report, I've just set out some of the amendments that have been made to the risk register since it was last brought to the committee. So the only amendment in terms of scoring was in relation to risk 16, which related to health and safety responsibilities. And the members of the committee was worth some comments at the last meeting around asking us to review this risk. So I did take that back to the risk owner, and as a result, we do have additional wording on the risk entry within the register, but also an update on the covering report where the inherent score has been reduced from 25 to 15, and that relates to the reduced impact score that's gone down from 5 to 3. And then there's some comments there around the wider controls in that area and things that are going on in terms of the safety management system. I did also take away from the last meeting that members, so that was one of the areas that you requested some additional commentary on, was risk 16. The other was around risk 11. So again, I asked the risk owner to feed back and provide some additional wording, which I understand is within the entry that's presented for you today in the appendix. So that's the general update. I don't have anything else for the committee that's been amended at this point. So we have had a good discussion about the risk register with corporate leadership team. And this is the current status. So, and it will be used, of course, as I've just said, to help inform the development of the audit plan for next year as well. So I'm happy to take any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Just a very brief one. On the change in risk 16, so is it the impact that is reduced from 5 to 3, or the likelihood that's reduced from 5 to 3? Because I think it's, unless I'm reading it completely wrong, shouldn't it be sort of middle right-hand side?
Let me just check. So we've got... Yes, it would appear it is the likelihood that's been reduced to 3.
So it's the likelihood
yes,
is
the likelihood,
okay.
Yes.
That's just fine. Thank you.
Just see if there's any further comments or queries for Rachel. Okay, so the recommendation is that the committee note the risk management update. Is everybody content that we note the update? Okay, thank you. So now we've got my numbering correct. I'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the internal audit progress report, and I think this agenda item includes the specific report which officers have attended for. So I'll hand over initially to Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the latest update on the internal audit plan delivery. So as usual, we've provided a copy of the full plan from page 60 of the papers in Table 1, which sets out all of the audit assignments and the status of each of those at the time of reporting and the outcome of those that have been finalised as usual. So we do remain on track in terms of the delivery for this year, and obviously that's shown within the plan statuses. We have finalised some further reports since this report was finalised, and we'll obviously continue to deliver the audit plan throughout the next few months. So the report is in the usual format and provides an overview on all of the reports that have been finalised since the last committee meeting. So in section 3, there are key findings on the 5 reports which were finalised since the last committee meeting. So I'll just run briefly through the key findings on each of those. As the Chair has said, there was one that received a less than moderate assurance opinion, which we'll obviously hand over to officers to give some further information on that. And then we'll run through the rest of the report. So the first was in relation to starters and leavers. So this was an audit where it touched on a number of different service areas. So essentially we wanted to get assurance over how we're supporting individuals when they join the council and making sure we have the right controls in place, but also for when they leave the authority as well. So for this we were looking at payroll controls to make sure that we are making sure we're not having overpayments when people leave the organisation, to make sure we're not having to make emergency payments for new starters because processes are not being followed in a timely manner. Also to make sure that the IT equipment that's being set up for new starters and that we're recovering that equipment when they leave in terms of those processes. And finally around access as well. So those were the key areas. So obviously we have a number of council buildings. When people join, they should be given access to the relevant premises, and we want to make sure that's revoked. And that has data protection implications as much as anything else, and obviously access to resources as well. So in relation to the findings, we've been able to confirm that there are good processes in place. Processes have been established in all of those areas we were looking at, and that includes things like e-forms that have been set up that essentially facilitate that starter and leaver process. We have, however, identified some areas where there is a need for improvement, and that's reflected in the moderate assurance opinion for the control environment. And that includes formalising the process around the return of IT equipment. So particularly when people are working remotely, if they're returning their laptop to their manager and their manager's not in the office, it's how that's being stored. Is it being returned centrally as well so it can be reallocated rather than holding on to it in case we have a new starter? So it's around documenting that process and making sure that's clear and consistent. Similarly with the access rights to council buildings as well, that needs further formalisation around making sure we're revoking access when people leave. And I do know that there's been action taken in relation to this as well. Having recently had some new starters in the team, I've been through that process. And so we've now centralised the access review process as well, which is good to see. We did identify some issues as well around the accuracy of the IT asset register and the facilities building access records, which, as I say, is underway and actions being taken in those areas. So overall, as I say, we gave a moderate assurance on the design of the controls in this area, a good level of compliance overall and a low organisational risk based on the overall findings. So the next was in relation to the IT strategy and governance. So I think this is a really important area for the council, and it's one that we need to make sure that we get right. There is a draft strategy in place, and it is being actively reviewed and discussed at senior management level, and we saw that throughout the course of the audit. Our review of the strategy highlighted some areas where we thought it could be further developed or further updated. It was developed initially in 2021 when the council was first established, so there's a number of areas where it could be brought more up to date and reflect some of the work that's already happened to date. We did look at the demand lifecycle process, which is essentially the process that IT projects should be following. So we've got some assurance around that and how that's working, and the oversight of ICT project work as well. So in relation to these areas, so we did, as I say, we did make some recommendations, particularly around updating the strategy, filling in some of those gaps, making sure that there's a clear linkage as well with the underlying strategies, which currently there seem to be some gaps and some missing information. So we looked at strengthening some of those links. We also wanted to see a stronger governance and reporting arrangement so that once we've got a good strategy, we've got a process where it's being effectively reported on and monitored, and we have that process embedded. In terms of the demand life cycle, we also looked at some areas where that could be further updated as well. So all of these have formed actions in the action plan. And overall, we've given a moderate level of assurance, and that reflects, I think, where we are at the moment with the IT strategy. So it needs some work. It's not formally approved at this point, but things are happening in the meantime. So projects are being delivered, and some of those other strategies are obviously working as well. So that's something obviously I think we will need to come back to see at a later time once that strategy is formally approved and look at how that's being monitored in place. But that's the moderate assurance that we've given at this time with a medium organisational risk. And the third report was in relation to external placements in adult social care. So this is obviously a significant area of spend for the council. We were able to confirm that we do have a range of contracts in place, a number of procurement frameworks, and also there's a move towards dynamic purchasing systems which do have the benefits of enabling contractors to join throughout that period, so it's not set in stone. It also enables us to have a better engagement in the market potentially and better oversight of those providers. So that was good to see. We also saw that the Quality Board has been set up to give some assurance over the contract management arrangements and also the embedding of the revised contract management framework. So that's good to see in terms of the quality assurance processes. What we did, however, note during the audit was the significant use of spot purchases, which is essentially outside of those contracts. And at the time of the audit, in our analysis, it showed an upward trend in the usage of those spot purchases as well. So we also looked at some specific cases, and we just wanted to see evidence that all other routes with our existing contractors had been exhausted before we looked at that spot purchase approach, and make sure that we're consistently complying with our contract procedure rules in those procurements as well. So we do obviously need to make sure that we're managing those appropriately. So that's one of the main areas that came out of the audit, and that was why we've given a limited assurance in terms of the control environment, because of that extensive use of spot purchases that we identified during the audit. What I would reassure the committee around is the high priority action in the audit report around the use of spot purchases has now been marked as implemented. So we've seen some good progress being made in this area, and I'm sure the David and Matthew, who are here today to give you some assurances, will be able to expand on that further. Did you want me to pause there, Chair, or did you want me to come back to that report?
Yeah, I think we'll do that one, just comment on that one now. So we'll go to the officers at this point and take questions just on that single one, and then we'll do all the others in one go at the end. So perhaps if the officers give their view of things, and then we'll ask you some questions. So if I just hand over to Matthew and David, and if you could explain their audit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, to provide assurance to the committee that we do treat internal audit as something which is welcomed within the Directorate. We work very closely with Rachel and her team every year to identify the areas where we think there may be challenges or areas that we could improve on. And I think this is testament to that, in the sense that we have identified it as an area that we wanted to look at, and there have been some recommendations that come out of that. I think the most important part, though, is that we're committed to implementing the recommendations from that internal audit. So I'm going to hand over to Matt just to provide a very high-level summary of what the service area does, just to give you a bit of an idea if you're not that close to it, and then just to provide some assurance around how we are implemented or have implemented the 6 recommendations that came out of the internal audit.
Brilliant, thank you. So if I start off by, well, what does the service do? So our brokerage function sits within the Commissioning and Performance Directorate. So that directorate covers the strategic commissioning of adult social care services, that's shaping the market and developing those contractual frameworks for providers to sign up to. We have a quality team that then monitors the quality of people's experience of drawing upon those contracted providers. But in between that sits our brokerage team. So they do that individual brokering of care and support for a person from a contracted provider. So just say, again, to echo David's comments, we welcome the internal audit report. So if I move on to the what have we done now. So in terms of spot placement, so that is brokering care and support from a provider who is not a contracted provider, part of those dynamic purchasing frameworks that Rachel touched upon. So I think it's important to take a step back and think about, well, how do we commission care and support? So one of the drivers for that increase in utilisation of spot providers was particularly home care. That's where we noted the most instances of the brokerage team having to contact spot providers. So we had a new contract go live in October for home care providers, and we moved from having a relatively small number of contracted providers in the teams to now having 114 contracted providers for home care. So that means that we now work with a much larger segment of the market, and we have greater capacity to draw upon in terms of contracted providers. So that's one of the challenges that was driving the increased utilisation of spot providers for the brokerage team. But in simple terms, we've added in some additional controls as well now. So before any brokerage officer can contact a spot provider, they need permission from a senior manager, and that senior manager will look at, well, what actions have we already taken? How have we engaged with contracted providers? Why is it that a contracted provider is unable to meet this person's needs? Are they so significant and unique it's reasonable that they're outside of what we can reasonably expect a contracted provider to do? And actually we've seen the utilisation of spot providers decrease significantly, and it's also given us greater oversight of how we engage with and contact spot providers as well. In terms of performance information and oversight, we've introduced a brokerage dashboard now. So at any one time, we can see, well, what's the caseload of an individual broker? How many packages of care are we in the process of commissioning, and at what stage are we at in that process? So is a provider assessing? Do we need more information from a care manager? Are we waiting a start date from a provider? Are we looking for funding to be agreed? So that tells us on average we see 350 packages of care go through our brokerage team in any given month. And I can say, well, 54 of those have been with the team for 8 weeks or more. So we have much more oversight of the workload and stages of commissioning for an individual package of care as well. One of the key areas that the internal audit report highlighted for us was our reliance upon interim roles, often grant-funded roles from the brokerage team as well. So we have reviewed the level of workload going through the brokerage team, and we have proposed a draft structure that's fully funded and will move away from any interim roles. And there's a live consultation now ongoing with the team. So job descriptions have been refreshed and regraded, and we're about to move into stage 2, which is job matching colleagues to permanent substantive roles as well, and move away from a reliance upon grant funding or interim roles to support our brokerage structure. So I think they're the main areas that I particularly wanted to draw out, alongside, just to reassure members, we've also formalised our ways of working in terms of procedures as well. So there's a very clear procedure aligned to the performance reporting that we have as well for brokers to follow. So if I pause there, happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for those updates. Just look to members, see if they have any questions on this one in particular. Thank you, Michael.
Hi, thank you for that. With anything like spot purchases, I think it's important that we check the correct authorisations are going through for these. Have we got anything in the internal audit plan for that? It's only because I think last meeting we talked about procurement cards and the not great authorisation levels. So it's always a risk for spot purchases in any business. So I'd like some form of comfort that we are checking that the level of authorisations, which ones are not being authorised, and the sort of the quantum of that.
So we're clear that any spot placement must be authorised. That's authorised either by myself or one of my direct reports, who's the service manager that leads our quality and brokerage function. So there's no spot placements that can be authorised by any officer other than a senior officer within the directorate. And that's because we're clear that engaging with a spot provider should be the exception. It should only be where one of our contractor providers cannot meet somebody's care and support needs, and that should be because they're so significant or unique that it's outside of what a contractor provider could reasonably do. And I think actually I would reverse it. I think it places the onus on our commissioning function to engage with the market and support the market, to have the services there that people living in Northamptonshire need, so that we don't need to engage with with a spot provider, and certainly that's been the focus of our work in redesigning our residential and nursing care frameworks, our home care framework, and we're currently reviewing now what's called our Commissioning for a Good Life framework, which is one of the frameworks, has a number of lots associated with it, but ensures that we can provide the support for people living with a learning disability primarily as well. And that review will highlight and tell us about any gaps that again, we need to engage with the market to support them in shaping their services, to remove the need for our brokers to need to engage with the spot provider in the first place, as well as then having the controls where a senior manager has to approve that, that engagement with the spot provider where it does happen.
Okay, thank you. So spot purchases, they can't be made then without authorisations from yourself. They can't do it and then retrospectively come to you and say, oh, I need authorisation.
No, so the very clear guidelines are that it must be, the permission must be sought before we approach a spot provider.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll go to David Watts, and then I've got some questions from Councillor Lee and Councillor Anslow. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just in addition to what Matt said there, I think it's important to note the work that Matt and his team have been doing around working with our provider sector. Part of the reason why we had a very large number of providers that weren't on our framework was because of a perception around the council, or a perception around the history of the council and how it engaged with the market moving forward. And Matt and his team have done a huge amount around that. And we have seen significant improvements on providers joining our framework as a result of that engagement which has been taking place.
Thank you. Councillor Lee and then Councillor Anslow. Thank you.
Apparently this is a widespread problem, not just in this council but in many other councils, that often a home carer needs to be found quickly, and there is, well, time is short, and so you need to get the care. So it is quite understandable that that there is pressure there. But I think the problem arises when then once someone is allocated to a service user, that the service user may find, well, that it's difficult to change the staff, because you would have an emergency carer for that person, but then that person, do you then stick with the service with the spot purchase, or do you then change the care for the service user? So I can see that there is a problem there. What you then do? Do you then change to the normal contractors, or do you prioritize the fact that this service user has care from the same person? I just wonder what you do in that case. Thank you.
Yes, I think in answering that, I'd probably talk about our pathways for people. So one of the key areas where often people need care and support at pace is to support a discharge from hospital, where somebody requires home care to enable them to go home. So our pathway for that, we have our internal reablement service that will provide support, so up to 6 weeks to support people when they first leave hospital, with a real focus on reablement, so supporting people to regain the skills that they need to live as independently as possible in the future. And to supplement our reablement capacity, last year we actually also commissioned another provider to Vida to provide reablement support as well. So that's that pathway, that immediate care and support to enable somebody to go home, but that provider will only ever support people for up to 6 weeks before one of our then contracted home care providers can take over and provide that longer term care and support and provide continuity of care. And in terms of that engagement with people, I think we're very good and very clear about managing people's expectations that this is a short-term care provider initially to support you to leave hospital, to regain with a real focus on independence before a longer-term care and support provider takes over. One of the things that we've done, which I think is a particular strength of our new home care framework, is we've changed the way that we broker care and support to offer people greater choice and control over their care provider as well. So brokers will go out to the market and get people a choice of provider, and then the person's social worker that they know well will go to that person, say, we've got a choice of these 3 care providers, here's a little bit of information about them, they're all contracted, which one would you like to use for your longer term care and support? And that's a new process that we've implemented this year as part of our recommissioning of home care as well, just to improve people's experience of both interacting with us and then drawing upon services as well.
Thank you. Councillor Anslow.
I think David answered it, but I'm not ever so sure. So a bit of clarification. Do these spot purchasers, the people who you go to as a last resort, are they then taken on as contract? Are they offered that?
So one of the things that we do periodically is to open our frameworks for new providers to join, and we are increasingly finding that we are more attractive to contract with because of the way that we're working with the market, both in terms of our expected to pay rates, but our broader offer for contracted providers. So actually it's not just about the hourly or weekly fee that we'll pay, it's the fact that we have a really good and really skilled quality team that can work alongside you to develop your service and improve the quality, which can support you in getting enhanced CQC ratings, you're more attractive to self-funders, and you've got a more sustainable business, alongside a pilot that we've offered this year of offering fully funded training in some key areas to our contracted care providers as well. And I think that, alongside opening our frameworks periodically, makes us more attractive to work with. So the example I would give is the move from home care providers being in the teens to having 114, many of whom were spot providers previously. So by recommissioning our home care, we actually reduced our spot packages of home care by 80% as well. And that's a pattern that we have seen, and I hope we would continue to see as we reopen our frameworks as well.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Excuse me. You were talking about pathways, and you specifically mentioned pathways away from hospital back to home. What about people who can afford to pay for care? Do you help them in the same way, or is that something that we do that's different?
So we do have responsibilities to support self-funders if they wish to approach us to help them set up their care arrangements. Lots of people don't approach us, they prefer to make their own arrangements, but where they do approach us, we can support them to go through exactly that same process. We'll assess their needs, we'll advise them what level of care support we think is required. However, as a self-funder, they can potentially purchase more than that if they wish to. So yes, there's absolutely those processes in place to support self-funders.
It's just that the work that you do is crucial at that moment of a sensitive moment when somebody's coming out of hospital, probably having something horrible happen to them at home before they got into hospital. And it's crucial that we're there at that point for everybody, really.
Thank you. If there's no further questions on external placements, so thank you for attending and answering all those questions. And now I'll look to the committee to see if there's any questions on the remaining key findings, the other four reports referred to in the report. And then we'll go back to Rachel afterwards to do the implementation and the review of the audit plan.
Page 55, which links in well with the training we did before, to do with, in respect of business grants. This is to do with this Prosperity Fund. The review found the council does not undertake checks on directors of companies applying for funding. I think that needs to be tightened up, quite honestly, regarding what we were talking about before with regards to fraud and so on.
Okay, if there's no further comments on those key findings, I'll ask Rachel to conclude the remainder of the report on the implementations and then that proposed review of the audit plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just to run through briefly those other reports. So as you mentioned, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the report on that gave a good level of assurance in terms of the design of the controls. One of those areas where we were looking to tighten up was around the checks on those business grants, which was a fraud-related control that came out of the audit. And there is an action in place in relation to that. We also wanted to get assurance from this around, it's a big pot of money that the council's getting to invest in these different areas. So we know that at some point we will have to provide a declaration and clearly show how that money's been spent. So we'd rather engage at this point, and we wanted to make sure we go in and make sure we can reconcile it, how we're coding all of this spend at this stage rather than later on in the project. So that's what we wanted to get from this audit, and as you can see, we've made some recommendations around how those costs are going to be collated and monitored going forward. And the last report was in relation to payments to social care providers, so it does have some links to the external placements report that we just talked about. So there was an action around processing payments for spot providers, which obviously should become less of an issue with the reduced use of spot providers from October onwards with that new framework. We also looked at around the processes generally, because obviously these payments are going outside of the ERP system, so we wanted to get some assurance around it, and something we talked about earlier in our fraud awareness training as well, around these types of other types of controls. So we were happy that there are robust processes in place around the processing of these payments and setting up the care packages, which essentially then feeds into that planning and payment process. What we have made is some recommendations around how we're making sure that the activity we're paying for is consistent with the activity delivered. So we just wanted to tighten up around processes around how providers are required to notify us of any changes, even if it's a nil return, to make sure that that's enforced, and also to ensure that any notifications are acted upon and there is a clear action and audit trail in relation to any notifications that are received as well. So those are the actions that were coming out of that audit, and again, we have an action plan in place. But the control environment we found is generally good. Because of those areas of recommendation, we've given a moderate level of assurance for compliance and a medium organisational impact overall. So the rest of the report provides an update on the implementation of actions. So as usual, we've got the usual tables for you on pages 70 and 71 of the papers, page 20 and 21 of the appendix. So since the last committee meeting, we've confirmed 17 actions to have been implemented by officers. We obviously still have a number of recommendations which are overdue, which are in the second and third rows. So there are 4 that now fall into that category of being high priority and over 3 months overdue. So as usual, I've provided you with full details of those in table 3 on pages 71 and 72 of the papers. So I'm pleased to say that of the 2 children's trust-related actions that we had that have been reported to the committee over the last few months, one of those has now been closed, but we do have one that still remains as the first line in the table. We also then have 2 IT-related actions and 1 from public health. For each of these, we've got the latest update from officers in the middle column, and the revised date provided in the final column as well. So, as usual, this has been through the corporate leadership team who've had full oversight of all of the overdue actions, not just these that fall into that high priority category, to make sure that we continue to be on top of these and are following up on progress. And the other area that I wanted to mention to the committee is in section 5 of the report on page 58 and 59 of the papers. So, as usual, we do continue to review the audit plan coverage throughout the year to make sure we're focusing in the right areas. There have been some audits that we have made a start on planning where actually it seems that we maybe need to give the area a little bit longer before we engage with the audit work. So that's also, we have that issue on one hand. We also have the issue that we now need to incorporate within our audit coverage for this year, testing of the accounts payable or creditors system. So previously these have been audited by the host authorities. So as North Northamptonshire doesn't host any of those financial systems, we haven't historically conducted those audits. The idea is now that those audits will rotate. So we will, for this year, conduct the audit on the creditors system. And that's been quoted as a 60-day audit, so 15 days for each organisation that's a partner in that system. So we obviously, if we need to facilitate that and resource that up, that has an implication for our resourcing to deliver the rest of the audit plan. But as I say, a number of these audits that I've proposed to postpone, we already had on the radar as potentially needing to postpone anyway. But just taking you through them. So the first was in relation to disaster recovery. So we did an initial piece of work on this earlier this calendar year in relation to disaster recovery and issued a report. And a number of those actions have not yet been implemented and still are not yet due to be implemented until in the next couple of months. So we wanted to give this a little bit more time. We're not looking to completely remove this audit, however. What we were proposing to do is to incorporate some elements of disaster recovery in the planned audit of business continuity management, which is scheduled for Q4. So as part of that audit, because it's so interdependent, we could look at looking at some key areas around disaster recovery and the progress that's been made in those actions, and then perhaps look to do a full disaster recovery audit next year. We also have the audit of recruitment and retention of social workers. There have been some actions taken this year, such as the market supplements that were provided in this year. We wanted to give some time for that to embed to see how effective that measure had been. As looking at areas where we could potentially postpone to next year, I think that's an area where we could postpone until the first quarter of 24-25 to look at that and have a year's worth of evidence of those market supplements being in place to see how that helps with the recruitment and retention of social workers. The SEND action plan, this was in the audit plan because we were expecting an Ofsted inspection, and this was to follow up on the actions from that Ofsted inspection, but there hasn't been an Ofsted inspection, so we haven't had anything to follow up, so I don't expect we will be needing those days, so I'm proposing we put those into the pot. IT software licensing, similarly, we do have actions outstanding, which obviously I've mentioned today in that overdue audit actions table. You'll see that the two of those relate to software licensing records, so those remain outstanding, so at the moment there wouldn't be a great deal for us to audit. And finally, the Signum project, which from discussions there is a much larger programme now underway around IT systems within the adult service. So I think it would be worthwhile us looking at that broader scope of the programme and perhaps factoring something bigger in for that in the new financial year to engage with that programme. So I'm proposing that we postpone those audits to replace with that creditors accounts payable audit this year. So that's a recommendation to the committee if you're happy to agree that change. I'm happy that we will be able to give still the level of assurance we need for the year, but I may need obviously to make some caveats in the opinion about some of those areas if I'm not able to get some assurance in those particularly around the IT areas. So that's a run through the rest of the report, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I just look to the committee, see if there's any questions on those. Councillor Lee, thank you.
I've heard in the past reservations expressed about Signum, the functionality of Signum. So if that is moved to the next financial year, can it be early on? Is that possible?
Through you, Chair. So the focus of this was around the replacement because we need to look at a new contract. So I understand we have an interim contract in place at the moment. So it's more around the procurement of that new the new software rather than the effectiveness of existing software, I suppose. But we would still be looking to do that, and I've proposed that would be quarter one of 24-25 that we would be engaging with those programmes. So, yes.
Thank you. One thing I'm always concerned about when we do delay audits, and we're shifting about 60 days out here, and I know it's being replaced by your other days, but these were being provided by other audit providers. So we're missing out on about 60 audit days. Now, you've given good reasons why they should be deferred. I think ordinarily we should look to provide some additional assurance there because we felt at the start of the year we needed those 60 days worth, and now we've lost them, and there would have been things just behind them which would have been valuable to put in. So whilst I accept what you're saying here, I'm just a little bit nervous when I see 60 days lost. That's quite a lot of audit activity. Would you like to comment on that, please, Rachel?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, yes, I'd agree. And I think, obviously, in some of these cases, particularly, for example, with this SEND action plan, there just isn't anything for us to audit. So, as you say, we could replace that with something else that had been on the reserve list. I think probably the additional assurance we'll get from doing the accounts payable audit ourselves as well, we can do a little bit more assurance around some of those controls, get more insight into that, which will be helpful. If we do find that actually we do have further resource available, then we obviously can look at additional audits that we can add into the plan. Where possible, I'm going to try and get assurances on those areas, as I said. So, for example, the disaster recovery, I'm looking to do some high-level coverage in the business continuity audit. IT software licensing, we're getting some assurance because we are regularly following up the actions from last time, so it's not that it will just be ignored. So if those actions remain overdue at the end of the year, with them being high priority actions, that will have to be noted in the annual assurance anyway. So an audit that just said the same wouldn't add a great deal at this point. So I think I'm comfortable it won't change my ability to give an opinion in those areas, and hopefully just adds a bit more value. But if the committee wanted to look at different amendments, that's obviously something we can look at.
I don't know if other committee members have got any observations on that. I think there comes a point where it will be, if we were heading towards 100 days, I'd be, because that's out of the audited days in total. So I think we just got to be a bit cautious on that. But if you're providing assurance that you think there's enough for you to draw your opinion, then I think I'm content with that. If anybody else has got any comments. If Councillor Eakins, thank you.
I'm just looking at, I mean, we mentioned disaster recovery, but I mean, that's not even been started yet, is it, if I'm right? but isn't that an essential piece of our business here? If we lose everything, then we're screwed. In blunt forms. But, I mean, also there's, I mean, obviously there's a couple of other things there, but just sort of like on the RAG ratings, where you put RAG ratings down, you know, I would have assumed that, especially on like disaster recovery, I mean, all the controls there should be red, red, red. Because if we go down, then that's a huge, huge impact to our business and what we do. In fact, our business and what we do stops. And then we just go into chaos. So I know it's trying to allocate which is going to be the most important thing to do. And the two most important things that we do is obviously children and adult care services. It goes without doubt. But without the disaster recovery, if something actually does happen, like Wellingborough maybe, where it's based downstairs in the ground basement where rain comes in and water and electric don't mix. So that's where you got your risks. So I think that should be looked at sooner rather than later, surely.
You'd like to comment on that, Rachel?
Yes, so as I mentioned, we did do quite a comprehensive piece of work on disaster recovery, which didn't actually conclude until the summer of this year. So it was in last year's audit plan, but it was reported in this summer. So it hasn't been that long since we did have some engagement on this area, and there were a number of actions that came out of that which are not yet implemented, and they're not yet due, some of them as well. So we are continuing to follow that. It's absolutely top of the radar in terms of risks, and it's recognised in terms of the Strategic Risk Register. But in terms from an audit assurance perspective, until there's more there for us to look at, there's not much we can test, I suppose, in terms of audit field work. So we want to give that some time. It doesn't mean it comes off the radar by any means. And as I said, if we don't get the assurance we need from that high-level piece of work as part of the business continuity audit, it's something I may need to reflect in my annual opinion. But I don't think there's much scope there for audit testing as such until we see that next stage completed and there's something for us to review. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. It's just I'd like my own opinion on this is that if at least we know something's still going on about it and that it hasn't just come off the radar, it's still there and it's still got to have to be things to be implemented. But it also in the background, although I know it's not an audit issue as such, but the practicality of implementing something there is serious. So even though you're not auditing it somewhere, but we must know where we are with it to see whether this business is at risk throughout not carrying out certain things like that.
Okay, thank you. Just seeing if there's any more comments or queries. If not, there's two recommendations, and I think I'll deal with these separately because they're quite distinct. So the first one is to note the progress report attached as Appendix 1 and consider the main issues arising. Is everybody content with that? Thank you. And then the second is to approve the proposed amendment to the audit plan coverage for 23-24 to include a 60-day audit of the shared creditors system and postpone the 5 specified audits from the plan. Just see if all members are content with that. Okay, thank you. In which case, now I'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the Audit and Governance Committee Terms of Reference. Now, I think this was noted earlier that this agenda item has been withdrawn and will be presented to the Audit and Governance Committee at the next meeting on the 12th of February. I don't know if you'd like to say a few extra words about this, about when we may receive this. I don't know who would be in a position to. So are you familiar? No. Janice?
I don't know exactly when we'll be able to receive it. It's being arranged through the monitoring officer with legal and governance in order to update the position. Yes. So unfortunately, it's not a report of mine, sorry.
Yeah, I did put you both on the spot there, but unfortunately we haven't got the officer here to ask. So I think when we write the minutes, we need to follow that up and get an update intra-committee on that, because I think it's quite an important point, and it links into some of the governance-related matters that were identified in the training beforehand. I know Councillor Lee and Councillor Anslow have some comments
I just wonder, these terms of reference, how much weight do they carry? If it says in the terms of reference we should have 12 members and 3 independent members, and it's just been decided over our heads that 12 members will do, which is what happens, should we not really have disputed this, and where should that then go if the terms of reference are breached by, I don't know, by the executive? I don't know who by, but well, what weight do they carry, these terms of reference?
I think my understanding, and I haven't got the officer here to ask, is when it went to full council, if you remember, it looked at the balance of all the committees and that mathematical formula, which I found a bit odd, which ended up with us having one less person, is at odds and inconsistent with the terms of reference. So I think we need to pick this up at the next meeting, but I think we need to get an update intra-meeting as well from the responsible officer. I don't think there's anything for us to note on that. Agenda item, the following agenda item is to confirm, I can confirm that there's no exempt or urgent items on this occasion, and if there's no other business, I'll close the meeting at 15:40. Thank you for everyone.